Hello and welcome back to the Coffin Lounge podcast. I'm your host, Vampire Kitten, and today I have my special guest, Bo Luellen. Hello, how are you?
Doing real good, BK. How's your day going?
It's doing pretty good actually. It's a little crazy. It's been hot, so hot, like unbelievably hot. But other than that, it's been good. Life's been pretty great lately. So, how about yours? How about what's going on with you?
Yeah, the heat is a great reason to be a creature of the night, right?
For
It's
sure.
you just melt. I've been walking on lunch break since I moved to this great new state that I'm in, and just by the time you get back, you're in a puddle. And I can't wait for October so that way the Halloween can bring some fall weather.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what it is that you do.
I started out writing during the pandemic really seriously. So I work in a telecommunications arm of Verizon, and they basically just said, stay at home. The world's ending. Zombies are coming back. We're all going to die.
It
You
was
can't date.
really
You can't get
dramatic.
laid. You can't breathe within 5 feet of one another. It was and I'm just sitting there white knuckling it, going, I'm an introvert. I've been training for this all my life. I got this. And so the inner goth took over, and I had been a really horrible writer up until that time. And I started taking classes and learning how to do the 3 act structure and learning the ins and out of being a horror writer. And I had this passion for vampires. So I wanted a very unique take on vampires. So book 1 of 10 kind of set up the vampire angle, and I used the African folklorish vampire, and which was a huge um, division away from normal Anglo-Saxon vampires, which is um, they stalk into a baby's crib, and they actually take the baby's life by draining them of blood, and then they take the body out of the grave and they train them up to be vampires themselves. And it was a fantastic exploration into that, and I really enjoyed it. And I'm a madman, so I wrote 9 novels during the pandemic in 1 year, and I don't think I saw a vagina for like a year and 3 months. It was crazy. And once I got out of whenever they said, "Hey, everyone can come out of your doom shelter. There's no plague bats that are coming to get you." Um, like I kind of looked around at the atmosphere of writing, and it had become oversaturated. So I didn't have a publisher. I was self-published, and I just kind of stored it up, and I started working on my carpentry, and I was really happy with that. I made vampire hunting kits, no offense. I made
None taken.
all kinds of Viking items because I was and am a follower of Loki and Odin, and hence uh, the long hairish stuff. And I just had fun with that. And then one day, my best friend, who's my manager, we got we got approached on a Netflix deal for the books, and it fell through. But during the process, my manager was like, "Hey, dork, why don't we just like do it anyway, but do it in an audio book or an audio drama?" And so I got in touch with some of the people that had been diehard fans of the book series. And I was like, "Do you want to be an unpaid voice actor? And if we get popular, I'll pay you."
Sounds
And
great.
that was exactly what they said. And turns out these lovelies had been drama students when they were in school, and they had raised kids, and they were like, I'm tired of being an adult. I now want to be like, I want to go back and do this. And it was just the greatest. And now, because of that, I have actual publishers coming after me to take the books and publish them again. And I'm waiting on, it's really weird to have people say, hey, we want you to send your manuscript to this, instead of you begging publishers like, hey, will you listen to this?
Hmm.
It's a different experience.
Well, first of all, congratulations. That's really exciting because that's
Thank you.
hard. That's hard to do.
Yep.
Second of all, COVID changed our climate, and a lot of artists spent a lot of time making art during COVID. So I knew that once we came out of that, we were going to have so much new music. We were going to have so many new musicals, so many new books, so many new things. And some of it's really great, some of it's really terrible, but we have a lot more than we used to have. And I thought it was really cool. But like the fact that it gave people, like it gave me a lot of time to reflect on my life, and it gave a lot of other people a time to sort of kind of rethink their direction. And I think that's so important because we were not put on this planet to just work and be uncomfortable and unhappy. And I think that's something that people really need to learn. And how to like refine themselves. And it seems to me like you and a lot of other people sort of found their passions and are kind of moving in a completely different direction in their lives that they just didn't expect, all because of this pandemic thing that happened, this once in a lifetime craziness that we all had to survive through. So I think this is really cool. Also, since you were talking about other cultural vampires, I think it's important to note that a lot of vampires in different cultures are very different. Like the Chinese, it's the Shang-Chi, and we have,
Shang-Chi.
yeah, Shang-Chi, and we have so many like really cool sort of vampires that haven't really been touched. I do really love Asian horror because they kind of touch on some really scary things, and a lot of that hasn't been seen by American audiences. So I think it's interesting that you chose African vampires of all things. I'm sorry, I don't know their proper name. What are their proper names? Do you have that?
Oh gosh, I don't, off the top of my head, I cannot remember their name. But to go on what you said, when I was doing the delve into trying to figure out the different folklorish versions of vampires, there's in my faith, there's an Icelandic vampire called a Druger.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God, it's so freaking cool. Can I cuss on this show?
Yes, you can. You can totally cuss on the show. I do
They're
it all
so
the time.
fucking cool. They're so fucking cool. So these badasses die, and then they stay in their coffins, and their spirit rises up, and they find people that have lust for money, and they haunt them, and they make that greed intensify, and they're psychic vampires that feed off that energy of lust. Totally dope. There's so many different types. When I was ghost hunting in Oklahoma in like, I want to say that it was 2002, we came upon a grave that had been dug from the inside out, and we nicknamed it the Vampire's Graveyard. A grave because it had this softball like hole that went all the way down to the grave, to the coffin, and you could see with a flashlight the red velvet. So the top of the coffin had been punched through in some way. And the claw marks, you could see these claw marks in this like funnel at the top. So like imagine this is the topsoil, and the funnel went down like this into like a softball like hole, and you could see these finger marks. And I mean, it's at the Bible Belt, so half the team is still Christians at the time that I was on. So
I'm sure they were panicking.
oh my God, their nipples were lactating with fear. Like they didn't know what the fuck to do, right? So I'm looking around this thing, and I'm just like logically kind of stepping through it. I was like, because the grave was from the 50s, and it's like, okay, so hoax time. Somebody fake buried a grave 50 years ago, then put like a PVC pipe down this thing, and then waited 50 years until the cops reported to our paranormal team that they were seeing a shadow rise up out of the grave and stalk through the neighborhood, because we got the call from the cops, from the chief of police, that was
That's
like,
wild.
we're digging this thing up tomorrow, but I want answers.
Did they find anything?
And I don't know how much I can say, but
Okay.
like it was a dope investigation that ended, that had far-reaching consequences for like 2 years. After that night, the woman I was with, she became a diabetic, an alcoholic. She got Graves' disease, and she immediately started acting completely different than she had ever acted before. We had multiple team members that their personality darkened,
Wow.
and we lost touch with a lot of them. That woman I was with, we weren't together 2 months later, and she just her appetites just went crazy for no reason. She showed up pregnant like 1 month later with just some guy that she had met, and it was just like, wow, it was just the personality changes. As for that grave, we had like electrical energy that was discharging out from the gravesite. It was crazy.
So I think that paranormal is interesting, and because that was one of the first things that I had ever really truly gotten into was the paranormal community about the same time. And I worked for a paranormal podcast company called Planet Paranormal at the time, and so I got to work with a lot of really interesting people all the time. And the stories that I hear from the paranormal community, I'm hoping to have some paranormal guests at some point, but it's kind of hard to believe when we tell each other these stories. But like, if you were there witnessing some of these things, it's even hard for us to believe, because part of what we did as investigators is debunk things. But it's hard to debunk things when stuff happens, like even just the residual effects of people just losing it is a residual effect of the paranormal community. And a lot of people can't really, at the end of the day, handle it like they think they can. I'm terrified of literally everything, but I was out there doing it. You know what I mean? Like, so I don't know. It's interesting that you say that, because that stuff does really, hit home with some people, and it does change people. Sometimes for the worse and sometimes for the better, but
for the better. I had every time that I have an interesting encounter like that, some way it shows up in my stories. And the reason why that I believe that werewolves scary, people are scarier. Like,
humans are absolutely the worst.
The worst. Like, if there was a robot overlord that came, I would be like, where do I sign up? Because you're going to make really logical decisions as I sign the contract of my life away. I went, it took me 8 years, and I finally got a appointment with the exorcist out of Oklahoma that was for all of Oklahoma. And, Catholicism has its challenges, but the cool thing about the meeting is that he was 45 and he looked 65, totally gray. His skin was wrinkled. He looked like he had just came off the beach from Saving Private Ryan. Like, he was in a constant blur.
He was putting in some work.
Oh my God. And so he was like, it changes your life when you're talking to someone you're performing an exorcist on in town A. Then you immediately get in your car, which is an old beat up car that the church gives you. You putt over, 200 miles to your next appointment. And the demon that was possessing point A picks up the conversation at point B.
That's
meaning
wild.
It just continues on. And he's telling me this, and I've been doing it I'm getting goosebumps right now.
I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it, because I've done like cleansings and things, but never on that level. Like, that's some stuff.
From what I understand, he's dead. Like,
oh, wow.
the Monsignor that I spoke to, like, he was already like, there's so many stories that he told me, but I used him in the books. Like, those experiences, I put that into the novels. And
I think that's a really great way of honoring someone, because he'll live on and be honored by what you've written. I'm sure there's probably like a spin on some things, and it's not 100.
Oh yeah.
But like, the fact that you have now taken this character that you knew and you've put him into your books, he's gonna live forever.
It was really, really neat to get feedback from people whenever I was writing something, and they would come back and they would say, um, "Did you actually experience this? Because this seems visceral. This seems like," and you would be able to say like, "Okay, not exactly, but there's meatier portions of this story that are true."
Right.
And it's I agree with you. The paranormal community did help kind of form me, much like it did you. But like nowadays, it's so corporate. It's so
It's yeah.
slap a sticker on it. Used to, in back in the 2000s, early 2000s, you get a worried phone call from some Christian lady that didn't want to tell her preacher something was going on at the house because they would judge her. And so
They'd call the
they would be
groups.
like, yes. And
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm into BDSM. And so it was sort of like when I was a pro dom, you get a call from a little Christian lady that was like, "Hey, I don't want anyone to know that I'm making this call, but can we meet?" And it was the same atmosphere. It was like, I don't want anyone to know that this is happening. And we went into this one house that was this uber Christian, I mean, Pentecostal. And so we sat down, did the entire investigation, and the only thing we got was this blackened camera strap. I thought it was a camera strap. And the old man, who's in his 60s, is at the sink. The old woman that's our client, she's in a chair. We're doing the reveal and whatever antiquated version of PowerPoint that we had. And she was like just sitting there, just listening to everything quietly. And then the old man behind her said, "There's your boyfriend." And we were like, "Come a jig of what?" And they get into a fight. And during the fight, not knockdown, drag out, but pretty snippy about how that this old man just told us that he hadn't slept with his wife in 20 years and that she had had a sexual, energetic relationship with this demon that had been in the house. And anytime he tried to sleep in bed with her, he'd get sick, or a glass would explode in his hand, or an appliance would shock him. And we're just like looking at one another, me and my co-owner, and we're like, so if you have any questions, let us know. And she's like, "I want a picture of that." And I'm like, "For what?" And she was like, "I've never been able to capture a picture of this creature until now." We were like, "Nope, I don't think that's going to happen. Thank you very much." Shut the laptop or whatever it was we had, and we left. There's crazy stuff that we've seen, and all that I used as tackling fuel for the books.
That's, I mean, at least you have some inspiration. So I looked it up. There's three. There are, I'm probably gonna butcher all of these names. There's the Asan Bassam, the Obeafo,
Nope.
and the Asmin. Asiman?
I think it's I
Asiman.
think it's the semen. I think it's the semen. It starts. It's like AS.
IMAN.
I think that's it.
Okay. So those are, but yeah, there are so many different kinds of vampires in folklore that I think that people, maybe we'll do like I would love to do an episode, maybe talk about other cultural creatures. That'd be super cool.
Have you seen the hopping vampires of China?
Yes. I don't remember what they're called though.
They're
And a lot of
so
them look
dope.
like demons.
Yes, Oni is what they call them in Japan, and they have these crazy artifacts to their culture, where it's a Japanese vampire. I'm sorry,
Right.
and they hop on one leg like a pogo stick.
So I'm looking at your Magica. You have how many episodes? 22 videos?
Well, there's 22 episodes in each season. We just wrapped season 1. We've got 10 more seasons. We got 9 more seasons to go for 10 seasons.
Oh wow. So you're doing a lot. You're doing the whole, is this the whole book or?
Yep, we've all 10 novels got taken down from Amazon because I wanted to make sure to clear the slate. And then we had to rewrite it for an audio drama, which is way different. So if BK is in the same room with another woman and I am writing that dialogue, I say, "BK replied," and then the other woman would be like, whatever her name was, Alicia. Alicia contemplated that and then responded. So that way you can identify who everything is. But in an audio book, like you would voice act it, and then another woman would voice act it, and you don't have to label
All
stuff.
the descriptors can be pulled out if you're just talking at another person.
So if you took 3 shots at a demon with a silver bullet or something like that, plow, 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 there would be maybe a paragraph describing the sounds and all that stuff to be able to immerse the character, immerse the reader. But honestly, all I have to do is just pop, 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 make 3 gunshots go off. So there's lots of times that the the audio effects take away from what you have on the written page. So we're making the entire manuscript right now into an audio drama, which is so much fun.
It's very cool. So I listened to a little bit of this. You do the narration, but you have a cast.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What's it like being a narrator versus a writer?
So it was kind of tough. I did a paranormal show podcast for like 5 years, and I learned how to remove the ums and the uhs and the ands and the so's. I still do so every once in a while, but it helped me make William Shatner like pauses rather than say and. So I was really, see, I just did it, and I was really ready for the challenge, but happily doing it through Audacity, you start off the project editing it down. And I did a class for, can't remember who it was, teaching young authors how to turn their work into audio dramas, but you really have to have a mixture. You have to be able to ignore how awful your voice sounds to yourself. Like, you hear yourself and you're like, oh my God, it sounds like I'm drowning a squirrel. Like, this is bad.
Yeah, I feel that a lot. I stream a lot. So when I'm streaming and I can hear myself, I'm like, oh no. But when I'm editing my streams, it's a whole different experience. I think it's just maybe because I'm listening to it after the fact. But then I'm from the West Coast. So when I moved to the East Coast, I lived near New York, and I could hear my own voice and my accent among theirs because they have that heavy New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts like accent, and I didn't have that. So when people talk to me, they're like, "Oh, you're not from here," and I'm like, "No, I'm not. Sorry." Like, so they like knew, and then I started hearing it in myself eventually. So now I can hear myself. I think once you get to the point of where you can hear yourself and you can hear your inflections and your tone and stuff, then you're like, okay, now I know what to do with that.
Yep. And one of my cast members, she's from Arkansas, but she's got more of a New Orleans twang to her. And she was doing a lot of work to try to brush that off. And I was like, no.
Don't do that.
Our story starts in Tulsa. So she made this, she was doing all the female cast members on the first season. So she was writing each one of them down and making notes. And that little badass like made completely different inflections in her tone.
Right.
I would feed off of her. So like as we were doing a scene together, I would think, oh my God, she's taking this in a completely different way. And I would follow her lead. And that to me was the amazing part. I can now see why actresses and actors don't like line readings from directors, because they want to be told how to perform this. Let me chew on this myself. And that was a tough one. And then I have to make notes for myself. So like the main vampire in my story, his name is Damon Dread. And Damon, as I've said before, he is an African folklore vampire, but in that folklore, they're insectoids. So they transform into a mosquito and back again. So I had to come up with the idea of how he communicates with his hive. Would it be telepathically? Probably. And how long would his offspring last before he got bored of them or they ventured out on their own? So I had to come up with a reasoning why this 2,000-year-old vampire would even, how would he even communicate with the idiotic, uncultured, unknowing humans.
Right.
So I watched an old episode of Star Trek, the first show with Kirk, and there was a character that was an android that was played by Herman Munster, who was this actor, this bulking actor,
Yeah.
and he talked like this, and he was deliberate in what he was saying. So the way that I made it was um, this portrayal that this actor made of this android that was a million years old and no longer knew really how to communicate with humans. I kind of shared that same philosophy with the vampire. So at first, my readers were like, "Wow, Damon Dredd, like, is he? What's wrong with him? Like, they didn't know he's a vampire. Like, he's elongating his speech, and it's like he's almost having trouble organizing his thoughts. And what's going on with him?" I'd be like, "I'm not telling you shit." And then by the end of the book, when he was revealed, everyone was like, "Oh, he's almost like an alien now. It's
Hmm.
almost like he has, like, he's trying to learn how to communicate again with dogs who are like so simplistic to him." And even in that, it helps me with my heroic points because sometimes the heroes get away with stuff just because Damon doesn't quite like understand the simplistic nature of their thinking. So they can kind of get away with a few things because he's like, "Man, I'm thinking like 200 years in advance, and like they're thinking about today." And
Right.
so why would they risk that? Well, that's what humans do. They, every day is carpe diem, like seize the day. And for this vampire, it's about seizing next century.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool. So you said there's 10 books in the series?
Yep. I think
Did
the total count was something like 2,500 pages at the end of it all.
and you wrote all this during COVID? Or did you start a little bit
I'm
before?
no, I had actually written the first three books before COVID, and then I just washed them away. I was just like, it wasn't good enough. I wasn't talented enough at that point to be able to go back. So I contacted some authors, and I was like, "Can I pay you to read these chapters and tell me how much I suck, literally, and then show me how you did it?"
Hmm.
And I got one to do it, and she was like, "Honey, I love you, but your stories are meandering." And I was like, "Unmeander me."
Right.
And she showed me how, and then I went back and revamped, no pun intended, the entire um, story structure of it. And I developed a staff. Of course, I've named my manager. He helped me with continuity. I had two proofreaders. I had an editor. I spent at the end of the project $31,000 getting everything professionally made. And so whenever someone read it, they were like, "This was on Stephen King's level of professionalism, the way it was put out." Like, there was word variety. You weren't reading the same words several times within a paragraph, which just snaps you out of a story. And I was always learning. And I could not for the life of me figure out how to break into the biz. So after a few revelations, I just was okay with creating my art and realizing that when I make a piece, like I made this table, when I make a piece, I'm going to enjoy it. And if someone else happens to enjoy it with me, so be it.
Okay. That's a really great way of kind of looking at art, because you've created art that you enjoy and you want to enjoy and you hope that others will enjoy it. And I think that's at its bare minimum what artists want anyway, is that they just
Mhm.
hope that people are going to enjoy the things that they create.
You're an awesome artist. Like on TikTok, back whenever I was on TikTok before my company had me whisked off of it, I would watch your post and you would come up with these absolutely insanely awesome makeup sets. where that you would have different designs, you would have different poses, and that artistic expression, like someone might look at it and say, "Oh, that's cool," and then they swipe up, right? They
Mm-hmm.
go to the next one. But that's your heart. Like you looked in the mirror and you did the work and you did the effort, you did the research, you figured out different ways of doing things, and you came up with your own style. So at the end of the day, it's the expression of your soul, and you have to figure out how not to get butthurt if someone says,
Eh.
"Hey, VK, like what's going on with this?" And you're like, "Hey, screw off, man." I
Yeah.
mean, how did you get past and I'll tell you how I did it, but how did you get past the critic? How did you get past that?
Oh, that's a great question. I know I've got a huge pause there, but that's a great question. I think that once you are criticized so much by people in your life that you thought cared about you enough
Mm, mm,
to turn around, and it's not constructive criticism. It's just being shitty because they don't like what you do. And I think that I'm trying to tread lightly here. I think that once you are criticized enough by friends or family or people that you love who don't understand what you do as a creator or as a person or as an artist or what have you, you get to the point of going, well, why do I keep downing on myself, like dogging on myself because you, family, don't like what I do, but I enjoy what I do and I love everything about what I do. So what does your opinion matter when all of these hundreds of thousands of millions of people that watch the shit that I do online actually enjoy it? So there's some validity there where you're telling me for years I suck, and all of these other people are like, hey, I actually really genuinely enjoy you. I get really nice notes every once in a while just from people that are just like, hey, you've inspired me to do more. Or, hey, you've inspired me to grow. Or, hey, you've inspired me to continue making art. That shit is so important to me. That means so much more to me than a family member going, well, everything that you do is stupid. And I think that sort of made me realize and come to the, like, a light bulb sort of clicked on where I'm just like, well, why am I letting these people get to me when I don't let these other people down and I've inspired them? So the fact that I've inspired so many people sort of made me go, okay, some people aren't going to like what I do, but other people, they really do. And I think that's
mm.
kind of how I personally got over it. And that was within recent years. That wasn't even, I think being an artist is so hard because you put yourself under a microscope so much. And your personal growth, once you get to that point, you're just like, now I just want to make art all the time. I just want to create. I just want to, even if it's not great, I've never been the type of person where I finished a piece and I'm just like, it's not what I wanted. I finish a piece and I go, it's not up to my standard of what I typically like to do, but I did experiment with something new and I stepped outside my box. So you have to give yourself that moment of like, I don't hate this. I just need to get better at it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really hard
to.
for a lot of artists to like kind of grasp because everybody's so critical of their work.
I found that I was assigning respect to people that had no connection to the art. I was family members, like you said, general fans. You come at it with this, everyone has a voice and everyone has a right to be heard, and I should look and appreciate whatever they're saying, and I should have the humility to absorb their criticism and actually contemplate it. Fuck that. So it's a difference between motivation and discipline. I didn't write those books because I had motivation. Motivation can be wiped away with a breath.
Mm-hmm.
Discipline is set in stone. No matter what you say to me or what they say to you, you're going to wake up and find inspiration, the muse, to direct your discipline to do what you need to do. And whenever those people are saying that to you, VK, those are people that are looking to, 100% of haters are, I mean, sorry, haters are 100% of lost potential. They never fulfilled themselves. They
Right.
never found success. They didn't take risks. They didn't have the artistic vision. They didn't have the discipline to go do it. So misery loves company, and the only way they can do is chop you down at the knees. And if you saw them at the pub and you recognize them as the hater that they were, they wouldn't have the same vitriol towards you because they're behind this effing keyboard, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have lost great amounts of artistic inclusions and endeavors and artistic talents because they didn't learn that lesson, and they let the haters get to them. They let the family members tell them that they weren't worthy of creating. And for the record, fuck them. And you just kind of move on,
That was the
right?
most eloquently put of what it's like to be an artist in our society with social media today. I agree with
It's
you
a tough one.
100%.
It's a
It's
tough one. Go ahead.
I think being an artist is really hard in general because you not only don't get paid for half of the stuff that you create, you have to find a buyer or like a buyer for it, or a place that'll put your stuff on consignment, or even get published, or even get, find a photographer that's willing to shoot it. Like, there's so much that goes, you spend more money than you make as an artist. And
Yep.
artists typically, which this is historically, artists typically don't get recognition until after they're gone. And I think social media has really helped us in a lot of things. And there's some art that I don't personally like. I think it's crazy ridiculous, but other people will buy it for millions of dollars. And
Mm-hmm.
art is so subjective in that I know eventually somebody out there will like my stuff. I mean, if it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't for COVID, I wouldn't have started creating a lot more, or even come up with this show. So I think that looking within ourselves, not letting people get to us is one of and not letting ourselves tear each other, I guess, how do I rephrase this? Not tearing ourselves down as artists and going, okay, I'm growing every day. I have to look at the positives instead of the negatives. And I will get better over time if I keep practicing. I think discipline is also a huge factor that people don't consider. I took drumline for 6 years when I was in high school and junior high. And drumline, just band in general, taught me discipline that I would have never learned had I not done it. And I attribute to my, I guess, work functioning life a lot to that discipline that I put myself through when I was a teenager. So I think, like, I feel like I got that experience that other people just didn't get. And you obviously got some sort of discipline experience. A lot of people get it from the military, but it's hard to teach to yourself when you don't understand that that's a tool that you need to continue being consistent with work, be it exercise, art, whatever. Going back to what we were saying about humans earlier, I definitely think that, like, I meant that 100%. Humans are the worst. And I think that there is something to be said for us kind of idolizing monsters and loving monsters, because there's some real emotion that monsters and horror have that people don't often see. I've seen a lot of documentaries where people are like, yeah, well, the Creature of the Black Lagoon is like a love story about how, people are just misunderstood. And there's all these like deep underlying sort of, I guess, tropes. Technically, it's kind of a trope, a horror trope, that is really interesting to me in film. And that's why I'm actually really happy to be talking to you as an author, because that's kind of what you do, you know? So what is it about horror that stirs emotion in you?
What I love about it, and I have loved for a long time, is that horror transcends gender, transcends culture. It It ignores politics. Anytime you try to put politics into horror, it doesn't work and it seems cheesy. You, um, everyone on the planet, whether you're a um, a Chinese teenager to a Canadian elderly man, everyone understands the idea of being chased in the dark alleys. Everyone can understand about your ankles getting grabbed from underneath the bed. And that primal fear, that fight or flight, is innate in all of us. And that's why I love horror, is because if I can find something that strikes fear in people, and usually it's not monsters, usually it's something that you can make something small as a part of a monstrous element. Like, I did research in New York for I think it was book 6, where rats were the main problem, and they were monstrous rats. And I was just like, how bad could rats be? Oh my God! So in New York, rats outnumber the population of the New Yorkers by like double, and they started finding people that were paraplegics or they were deaf or infants, and the rats would have gnawed off their feet and their hands and their eyes and their tongues. I read story after heartbreaking story. The kids' stories I had to stop reading, but the elderly stories I could still kind of handle for a little bit. But like, they had this one patient in a New York hospital. He was elderly, complaining of renal failure, and the nurses were just like, he's screaming, but it's just old man such and such, and it's his back, and we've done all we can for him. And they walked in, and the rats had ate his eyes and ate his tongue and ate his extremities, and the guy lived. And you can only imagine. So I turned that into something from my horror novels. So I had a rat catcher whose background story was that his drunk alcoholic mother had passed out, and whenever he found her, the rats had eaten her and were crawling around inside of her. And I had letters that came to me that was like, this can't be real, and I would send the articles. And that's why it plucked that cord that's attached to our soul. And it doesn't matter about outlooks, anything like that. Horror will find the melody, it will find the vibration that makes you want to jump out from your seat and run for safety.
Mm-hmm. I I'm not a huge fan of like jump scares. They get me every time. But there is something to be said about horror in that it stirs so many more feelings than any other genre.
Yep.
And fear is such a powerful tool in horror, even in horror, like even as a jump scare. You know, it's simple, it's stupid, but it's effective. And I think that going into a little bit of media entertainment, Hollywood, I've worked in that realm a little bit. They don't take horror seriously.
No.
And it blows my mind because this year, actually, was it this year or last year? Mia Goth made some incredible stuff last year. Did you see Infinity Pool? Did you see X?
Mm-mm.
Oh my gosh. The horror that was out. I saw the menu. The menu was incredible. Did you see that? It was very different and very cool and kind of a weird satire on our society as a whole. But like things like that, why don't Hollywood take seriously? We see the same thing over. Superheroes, canned, the same stuff over and over and over, recycled. But then the general population gets a little taste of horror and they're like, wow, this is like the craziest thing I've ever seen. I think another good example of just the general population getting some sort of storytelling that's different was, did you see Everything Everywhere All at Once?
Yep.
Did you like it?
I thought it was interesting. I thought it was not as good as they made it out to be.
Right.
I thought it was a fascinating concept that mirrored so many other projects that had been done, including, you know, the Multiverse of Madness, the Infinity Gauntlets. It was like, in my opinion, they kind of latched onto that and made something else, which Michelle Yeoh, big fan of like that's all great, but I think that I think Hollywood latches on to things that work and they try to reproduce them over and over and over again. It was like Jaws, my favorite uh, horror movie of all time. And if Hollywood keeps going down the road that it is, you would see Jaws with like a tuna instead of a shark.
Yeah.
And the captain would be like a middle-aged black woman from Europe, and like the police chief would be a Latino man from blah blah blah, and it seems like they're afraid to let somebody write about time as it was. Like Outlander is a series that my girlfriend got me into, and I was really happy with the way that they kept to the period pieces. In other words, she wasn't lecturing people about modern morality. She was having to deal with this is 14th century Scotland, and by gosh, equality hadn't been figured out yet. And I love that.
I really want, going back to cultural horror. I love. I'm a big softie for urban horror.
Mm,
Like really shitty urban horror movies. Like I really
mm.
love anything that's like gangster mob East LA, like just vampire werewolf, weird, like zombies. Like I think we need to see a lot more cultural horror, and I think that we're trying too hard to be, and I'm trying to tread lightly here.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're being too hard to be like PG in our society.
Yes.
I think we need to go back to our
Yes.
roots and our cultures, and I think that people need to really like reach out into their lore from their culture and make some of those movies. I'm really into folk horror right now because it feels raw and new, even though it's not. It's
Yep.
it's people are finally starting to realize, like, let's make this story about the Wendigo. Like,
Yep.
did you see Antlers?
Oh, yes. And
Okay.
Splinter was another one that
I
was a great
never
little
saw.
horror movie.
Okay, I will check it out.
It's the best.
But
And
it's
then The Ritual.
The Ritual's
Um,
very good.
there
We
was
need we definitely need
go
more
ahead.
of that.
Yes. And then they made a kaiju movie out of Iceland called Troll.
Oh,
And
that is a really good movie.
I've
It is
seen it so many
so
times.
good. I love Troll.
There
They
was there's so many missed opportunities that people, I think they are scared of taking chances and not modernizing, but making the folklorish monsters what they would be like in modern life, but just remind us like, hey, these are items like Mother Nature. Like, you're not going to negotiate with a hurricane. You're not going to be able to plead with a tornado.
right.
This is coming for you.
So I think that a movie that should have probably gotten some sort of recognition last year, since we're on horror, Evil Dead Rise, the
Mm.
makeup and the acting in that film should have at least been nominated,
And the sound design.
and the sound design. But because we don't take horror seriously, I think Evil Dead Rise was better than all of the movies that people won Academy Awards for.
Yep.
And I love Jamie Lee Curtis, but I don't think that that was her best role.
You can say it more bluntly.
It was not a great
She's
role.
It was not a great role.
It was
And
fun,
not
but it was not a
but
good role.
but it's the same thing that they're trying to do with the modernized Halloween movies. There was so many hits and misses that they had with that, and if they had just rolled it back to the idea of one, I would even go back to having like Michael Myers was the original bad guy in the whole setup.
Right.
And then it turned him into a villain. Me, this is getting personal. So, like, my mother had challenges and she did the best that she could, but there was a deafening terror that went through that house from age 0 to age 17 when I was emancipated. And I had two ways of dealing with that: the never-ending nightmares every night, the terror, the hypervigilance, the hyper terror. I could either succumb to it and swing by a rope by my neck, or I could share my terror with other people. And so I started off by writing D&D campaigns. And 1987 was my first one, and I started really doing it in 92. Then I started writing books for TSR, and it was like I loved horror. And so whenever that dread got pumped into those stories, that kind of fueled me to be able to write actual horror. And I think that if you can survive it and you can redirect the energy instead of ignore it, and you can embrace that the demons that live within inside you don't need to be eradicated, because they never can, but if you can make them pay rent, that's dope.
That is a great way of putting that. Don't let the demons destroy you, but make them pay rent. For sure. We started with a lot of, we're talking about a lot of horror. What do you think of, I guess the last Voyage of the Demeter just came out. It did terribly in theaters.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It was, I believe that you can safely say it bombed.
Mm-hmm.
But so did Big Trouble in Little China. So did The Thing from John Carpenter.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of cult classics that are going to be looked back on favorably, and they'll make their money in return. Where they're really going to have a problem is that used to, if you and I, like, if we were friends and we were meeting in a pub, and I'm like, BK, stop what you're doing and go rent The Thing, and like you won't regret it. Like,
I would do it. But
oh, absolutely. And there's a physical media there, right? So John Carpenter is going to get kickbacks off of that. The studios are going to get bigger kickbacks. Now that we're on in this big streaming service, like, by the time a word of mouth gets to all of us horror fans and we start engaging in it, it won't make its money back.
Nope. And it's unfortunate, because then it makes studios go, well, I don't want to make anything like this anymore because it doesn't make any money.
Mm-hmm.
I know that
the blame game.
The strike is going on right now. Did you hear that? I don't really want to get too much into that, but did you hear that they approved? I think I talked about this on another podcast. A24, a really great independent horror film company, was approved to make films during the strike.
Really?
Yes, highly recommend you look into that, because A24 made things like Swiss Army Man and In Fabric and some really, really amazing indie horrors with really great writing, things that I feel that people need to go watch. So they got approved because they actually know how to pay their people. And they actually give a shit about their actors and writers and things. So I'm really looking forward to us kind of getting a little bit more indie stuff during the strike, because that means we're probably going to get more horror.
Yes, because horror is a good bet. Horror is not a good bet on a big scale. Like, you get Carl and his wife Sandra, who have seen all the Marvel movies, and they have their walls are decorated in whatever major league football or baseball team is in that town. And they're very into family atmosphere stuff because it's the best thing that they can, like, everyone can connect with. They want safe bets. Like, people nowadays are fans of Disney. They're not fans of Sleeping Beauty. They're not fans of good storytelling. They're fans of a product. And so whenever you have horror is sometimes, if you get it right, is a good story, and something that will absolutely, where like you and I are sitting around the coffee table and we're talking about something, and all of a sudden, like I say, you know, splinter, or you say something, all of a sudden, bam, we're like, oh my God, right? And that story, we're not talking about the production studio. We're not talking about the Epcot Center, ride that's been surrounding it, right?
Right.
It's why the Marvel movies became so became so much of a formula, where that they were the same movie. Like I would sit there and watch movies and I'd be like, that's Iron Man 1. That's Iron Man 1, where you can see the same
Story being
process
told
all over again, just a different suit, different person, a different set of powers, and it's the same thing.
Right.
With horror, you don't get that. Like with horror, it's a unique terror. Otherwise, horror fans are very discerning. They'd be like, no, this isn't doing it. You gotta
scratch
give
that
it
itch.
something else. That's right. And it's a horror is that low growl that makes you pay attention. And anything that seems too commercialized feels pre-processed and doesn't taste right. And the only way that you're going to push past that is going to be in smaller markets with indie developers who make something undeniable. And then we get behind them. And sometimes that's tough because, like in the vampire community, there's a lot of politics that go into that.
So let's talk about. We got to wrap it up soon. I want to hear a little bit about your woodworking. You are the Heathen carpenter.
Yes.
And
so
what do you create, and how did you get into carpentry?
So the Heathen Carpenter is something that I developed after the Goth Carpenter. So I started off as the Goth Carpenter, and for some reason people couldn't understand. They thought I was building goth items. I was like, no, I'm a goth that's a carpenter. And so that was kind of confusing for them.
Bad marketing.
So yeah, it wasn't good. It wasn't thought out. And so I was like, well, I'm a follower of Loki and Odin. I will just say the Heathen Carpenter, and that worked out great.
It's really cute.
And also it was it made a lot more sense because a lot of my items have a Viking theme to them. Like I made a couple of Viking long tables that were, one was 9 foot, one was 10 foot. And the real problem with making Viking furniture is that it's fucking heavy. So like if someone says, hey, can you, like I had this one lady, she wanted me to make her a headboard that had BDSM elements on it. Real cool idea, real cool stuff. I couldn't wait. And then I told her, I was like, well, shipping this is going to be somewhere around $1,000. And she was like, how much is the headboard? I was like, it's going to be about $3. And then she was like, man, after taxes, that's going to be about what? I was like, $4,500, about that. And she was like, no, I can't do it. And so you have to find people locally. Well, I was until a week ago living in the Bible Belt. So you don't find too many people that are willing to do that kind of stuff. And even like I braid my hair with and put Viking beads in it from time to time. And I remember just getting awful looks. So again, kind of bad marketing, right? But it's just who I am. So it isn't like I can change that, right?
Right.
But now since I've gotten in New Jersey, and I can't build it for them, but as soon as I like announced I was coming to New Jersey, I had New Jersey people.
They were like, oh gosh, let's go.
Yes. It was a completely different atmosphere. These folks don't give two shits. Like they are in a hurry. They're ready to go. And it's really interesting because up here in the north, people don't care so much about what ethnicity that you are or what religion that you are, or They're just trying to get from one point to the other. It seems. Maybe I'm wrong, but that seems to be the way it is for me.
As someone who lived in New Jersey for 4 years, yes. As a West Coast person, I tend to be polite to other people. I'll talk with them in the line at the grocery store. If somebody's like looking at me and or like looking at something and they look confused, I'll be like, yeah, that's a good thing. You know, that's a good product. Like, I'll sit there, I'll make a conversation with somebody. I do that in New Jersey. Oh man, that is not how we work. Nope. Not how we work at all. So it was definitely a crazy culture shock for me going from the West Coast to the East Coast, because I don't know. I guess I'm too nice. They are just not.
So it was more about getting it
Immediacy.
in and out. Let's go. Yeah, and I'm a Southern gent, so like I still open the doors for people. I still wait for Steph to sit down first at a table before I sit down. You know, stuff like that. But I've seen stuff so far, quite frankly, that probably get a fella talk to. Like, there's a lot of, I went into a gym and I saw a dude just stand behind a woman and stare at her ass, and I was just like, and I mean within like 4 feet from her, and my jaw was just on the ground, and I was like, oh well, they obviously have to be together. Nope. And the chick that was working out in front of him, like, she never even looked his way, and I just thought, is that behavior?
Yeah,
yep.
They just have to stay in their own world,
their own zone. And I was just like, is that so commonplace that that's just the way things are? I don't know. Maybe I'm old fashioned.
No, I think it's just a lot of cultural differences. I've lived all the way across the United States at this point. There are so many cultural differences. It's so massive, right? And people are raised so differently, that I was raised with manners. A lot of people weren't. So I have to recognize the fact that you're not being rude on purpose. You just don't have manners. You know what I mean? Like, so I think it's really hard to live all over the place, because you eventually adjust, but you don't want to be a piece of shit either. You know, like, you still want to be a good person. It's hard.
And also our introverted nature can sometimes, like, when I first got here, I was just like, oh, people don't really talk to each other. And they just kind of walk past. Like, I went for a walk down the street because, you know, I like to walk at lunch break. And I passed this fella and, hey, how you doing? Straight ahead. Just kept on walking. Nothing. And I was just like, oh, so maybe this would work out. Like, this might be an introvert's paradise.
You don't have to talk to anybody.
You don't have to say shit. You can just keep on going.
Existing around each other. Also existing.
I am very happy that I'm here, and we're probably going to wind up buying a house in the area in a year. And then after that, maybe about 4 or 5 years in the area, then we might move somewhere else. And like, the United States is a big place, and there's lots of points on that area that I can go to, and we might end up in Montana, we might end up in Florida, who knows? But life teaches you where you need to go. You just have to have the boldness to listen, you know?
Right. So what did you make when it came to your carpentry? And what was some of your favorite creations, I guess?
I made a vanity for my girlfriend that was a nightmare to make. I loved it, but it has a see-through top. I call it the fairy fire vanity, and it has these different colored slats. I sent you a picture of it, and it glows on the underside of the tabletop. So when you open the drawer beneath it, it's got light inside, so you can see everything inside. And the soft white of the tabletop glows up on your face, so that way you just don't get lights that create shadows on your chin, but you get lights that are 100% around your face. And that was one of my favorite ones. Man, I made it a remote control, so that way she can walk up to it and hit a remote control and the whole thing comes on.
That's very cool.
And it was interesting. And then my bed, which is a 250-pound monster that um, has interesting elements on it, if you know what I mean. And
Totally.
it's it's got the Viking bulk knot in the center of it, and it is solid. Um, and it's built that way. It's double reinforced on both sides, and it's just made to last a lifetime. And that took me 3 months to build and design and get it done. And once I made it, people started ordering it, and I was like, "Fuck you, no!"
Right.
Like this took rings off my tree of life. Like
Right.
I will not be doing this again.
So little
And
projects that you were selling online, what did you make for others?
oh, I stopped selling stuff and I started just giving them away. So I would only like if something hit my fancy, like I have some witches. I have a lot of witches that are followers of mine. I love them to death. And every once in a while, there's a very good witch that asks very politely, and I'll make them something. And I made a necromancer staff for one of my voice actresses, and I waited for a storm, a big storm that came through Claremore, the city I lived in, and it knocked down a bunch of trees. So it was sort of like Thor's hammer came and knocked down the tree,
Recycling
and I
nature.
just that's right. And I
Mm-hmm.
just found a staff that was the right length, and I cut it off, and then I inserted a flashlight in the top of it, and then I made a resin crystal, a red crystal on the top, so when she goes to like Ren fairs or something, she can flip that thing on, and it's like a beacon to her family. They
Very
always know
cool.
where she's at, and it's got vines of power that come up, and then the front of the staff has like spikes and spike collar spikes that I leather worked into it. So it's got spikes that go up and down it, you know, plus 18 to hit Christians, that kind of stuff. And like it has, um, it has that feel, and I loved it. And it was um, a lot of little smaller stuff. Like I made a wand for a witch, and I love burning wood, doing wood burning. I did a lot of art. I'm sort of a competent, sort of not artist, so I would create pieces that had like the tree of life on it, or Odin's wolves, or his ravens.
Right.
And I made a wedding gift for a witch that was one of Odin's ravens flying towards them, and then put her new initial on it. Just stuff like that. I like making people happy. I don't like I'm not going to get rich off my wood working. I kind of figured that out. But what I can do is surprise people with something that they might keep for the rest of their life, you know?
Right. That's really cool. Well, thank you so much, Bo, for coming on the Coffin Lounge today. It has been a
You're welcome.
very enlightening, very interesting conversation. I'm so glad I got to talk about horror today. Very cool. Where can people find you on the internet?
Um, I have a Facebook account that's called the Heathen Carpenter. Um, Magica is another Facebook group, Facebook page that I have, but the audio drama is so new that I think I have like -5 followers on there. It's Magica is spelled Magicae. It's the Latin version. So it sounds cool, but marketing wise, people are like, what do I type in? So if you go to YouTube and you look up either Bo Luellen or type in Magica like I spelled that just then, you'll find the audio drama. And we throw up one season at a time. And as we're working on the next season, we upload them per season to the Patreon subscribers.
Okay.
So once we get an entire season done, then we throw it for free on the YouTube. So the Patreon subscribers are actually one season ahead.
Oh,
And
that's
they
smart.
seem to enjoy that. Yeah. And it still gives the free users the ability to join in. They just have to wait like a normal show for a couple of months for the season to be done. And but it's really cool because the as seasons continue to collect, uh, more and more voice actors kind of join on, and it's a lot of fun.
That's good. Well, I will make sure that they also go in the description for both the Spotify and the YouTube
Thank you.
links. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today. Today was awesome. Thank you to everybody that has been listening so far. We are available on Spotify, iTunes, and YouTube. If you could like, subscribe, follow, and we will see you on the next one. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye-bye.